as a leader, you're supposed to facilitate meetings, and then someone in that meeting says, oh, you're not speaking enough. And how do you balance what you know to be, or what you thought to be right, versus like some voice, because you might get conflicting feedback. Some people might hate that you're speaking in the meeting. How do you balance like all that information and take what's good and leave out what's bad?
When it comes to receiving feedback, there are a lot of different things to keep in mind. All feedback is valuable. It is a touch point that tells you how others are perceiving you or your work or something you said, whatever it may be. Some of it, however, may be something that you're going to change, and others are not. And it's up to you to choose how to incorporate the feedback that you receive. I think about if you're building a culture where feedback is common and feedback is productive to support everyone's personal growth and career growth, it can go in different stages as well. It doesn't become overnight everyone sharing their own personal failures for the group to learn from. That, I think, is one of the later stages that you can get to. But I think even one of the first stages is getting people to freely share and talk about what went well, rather than keeping it private, so that others can learn from their success first. And then you may move on to a stage where you have one-on-one conversations and those private discussions of, hey, I'm really struggling with this, or I lost this deal and I want a second pair of eyes on why.
And how do you provide feedback to those higher above you, if whether they want to hear it or not? How do you do it in a tactful way and make sure that if you're unhappy, you get heard?
Ideal scenario is that you have leaders that are actively seeking feedback. That's not the case for everybody. So it is something where I think you need to provide feedback in small doses, but regularly, if you're starting to build that trust. You really want to be in a position where you're able to say, these things are going really well, and these things I'm struggling with for this reason. Either I'm struggling with it to understand the decision, or I disagree with it, whatever it is. When we talk about feedback, I think some people assume, and I often fall into this trap as well, that feedback is always about things that are bad or constructive feedback. One framework that I find really useful in thinking about feedback is the start, stop, continue. Start doing this thing you're not doing. Stop doing this thing that's not benefiting you, and continue doing this thing that's great. Don't give it up. Right? So often, if you're succeeding in your role, you might know that you're succeeding, but maybe you don't know exactly why. And the most feedback you get is, that was great, but not what made it great or what could have made it better.
I was succeeding for the first 2 years of my career. And then I was requested that I stop everything that I was doing and start doing a lot of other things. So it's interesting, because success at least in my area, was, oh, I achieved quota. And I honestly, we achieved quota despite of my efforts, not because of my efforts. So sometimes success is not really I could have been a lot more successful, let's just put it that way. But that's the thing, like, no one shared with me, no one provided feedback in the past, up until the senior VP of sales came and visited me, how to do things properly. And sometimes when we're early on in our career and we're doing something great, we don't want to share it because we don't want to seem like we're bragging, especially to those who have been there longer. What's the framework of sharing feedback at that? How do we overcome that feeling of sharing feedback and not bragging or humiliating ourselves on the other end of the spectrum?
Absolutely. I think it takes a different degree of comfort or discomfort for everyone to share things publicly, whether it is a success or whether it is a failure. And that threshold, like I said, it varies. for me, it's a little higher than for other people, I think, than for the average. It was something I had to overcome myself to talk about my own successes publicly and also to talk about my failures. But it's a journey I went through and that I am really passionate about supporting my team and going through as well, because ultimately it just made the rest of my peers better when I did do that. And once they started doing it too, I learned so much. I didn't have to struggle through something on my own to get to that point of success. So, there's how do you do it?
Well,
It varies for everyone to get to that point, but go ahead.
maybe before we get there, how did you realize that you are not, that you have that high threshold that you need to overcome? Because a lot of us, we just go through life and we don't know why, like, we have that threshold, or even that we have that threshold. We just think we're not supposed to share anyways. How did you get the self-awareness that you need to share more and that you need to overcome that high threshold?
It was a piece of feedback I received.